And good afternoon. My name is SYAZWANI binti Abdul WAHAB and my matric number is 2628886.
My name is Stella and Teoh with metric number 264677. For today's presentation, we'll be covering the introduction, literature review, analysis, and conclusion, as well as recommendations that we have come up. Let us begin with a quote from Geoff Livingston. Cyberwar is the battlefield of now. Now I'd like to pass it to Jay and Fathin for the introduction.
As the world is moving towards the Industrial Revolution 5.0, the seventh innovation wave, the finishing line to the newest leg of the global race is in cyberspace. As such, in order to cement their position as superpower, Russia and the USA are neck to neck as they battle for the dominance in the new frontier. Their tendency will determine whether one of these two will eventually tip to the scale of the world.
There's two research objectives of this study, which are to analyze the evolving relationship between Russia and United States of America by using framework of international relation concept such as neorealisms. The second one is to evaluate the potential effect of these bilateral relationships on the balance of global international system.
So, for the first literature review, based on the great powers in cyberspace, the strategic drivers behind US, Chinese, and the Russian competition, written by Matthew Bay. The journal is about the contrast between the US, Russia, and the Chinese perspective on cyberspace and the different strategic principles of the three countries. The author highlighted that the priority of China is to ensure that the international cyber standard do not develop in a such way that its domestic policy become a risk, and that China's cyberspace policy is closely related to its international security. Moreover, Moscow has used cyber operation to conduct large-scale of misinformation campaign overseas, most notably ahead of election in countries such as the US and the France. The author stated that Russia is a specialist in many cyber technology and it has a few excellently software-based technology firm, and low-cost strategy will continue to be a key element of Russia's cyberspace strategy, even as the West will continue to build more advanced response mechanism to combat them, while for the US is striving for a rule-based structure or a central body to control the cyberspace, like the World Trade Organization. Overall, the author delivered that as the political competition heats up, the rules of cyberspace will possibly remain ad hoc and muddled. In the sense of Western-led international system, China will be unlikely to support the development of well-defined cyber norms. Meanwhile, both China and Russia will continue to attempt to manipulate the wholes of governance or cyberspace to further their goals. The author also concluded that the rising great powers competition between Russia, China, and the US will give a huge impact to the evolution of cyberspace and the norms around it. However, the author did not explain further on how far the cyberspace will evolve and give impact to the international system under these three great powers competition. The question to the effectiveness of the three great powers strategy in cyberspace remain unanswered clearly in this journal. Moving to the next literature review based on the strategic cyber responding to the Russian online information warfare written by Matthew Javelin. This journal is about the Russian success in attempt to change its undesirable cyberspace status primarily by hoping that the US will panic into the bad policy decision and also failure to see transparency as a way stopping all about Russian from winning the cognitive offensive. This study contains of three major incidents: Russia's cyber war, which are Estonia, Georgia, Crimea, Ukraine, that demonstrate the Russian direction of countering these challenges and seeking a stable base in cyberspace. The cyber age complicated things because opposition forces inside Russia had a digital presence, which is an indication that conventional obedience to the government mandate was highly suspicious. Not only does this development underscore the ideological aspect of the stand-alone cyber war, but it also underlined the lack of understanding within the US of this phenomenon. The author concludes the article by emphasizing the strategic significance that the United States maintain in the cyberspace and provides few recommendations for retaining this benefit. The study then turns the state rivalry in cyberspace into a respected context and showing how a conceptual cyber offensive can extend a consumer access to cyberspace and help a way to a new age of containment.
The article that I reviewed entitled Russia Cyber Aggression and the New Cold War by Mason Shuya. The article is about the tension between US and Russia and how Russia used hard power approaches in dealing the tensions. The good relationship between Russia and the United States of America had begun during the Cold War era and it's continued until today. The good relation between these two countries getting more colder due to economic sanction policy that been imposed by Obama during his administration, which led the Russia people getting more suffered. So Vladimir Putin been waiting for a chance that he will lash out the anger toward US. The right time for Vladimir Putin to lash out his anger toward the economic sanction policy that imposed by Obama is during the 2016 presidential election. Putin meddling with 2016 presidential election because he don't want someone to be named as president of US is the same party as Obama, which is Democrats party. He believed that Democrats candidates, which is Hillary Clinton, will continue the policy that been imposed by Obama. However, the next president of United States still imposed the same economic sanction to Russia.
Now let us move on to discussion and analysis. For the first part, Jay will be explaining the concept that we have chosen to base our analysis on, followed by our analysis of the key events that have occurred and the real-world problem that is relevant to our theme today.
Now move to the first part of our discussion and analysis, which is understanding international relation concept through neoliberalism, liberalism, and constructivism. Now the use of different international relation concept can mean different explanation of cyber war as the analysis is focusing on different things. Take neoliberalism for an example, a state-centric theory. Its main focus will be on the security. In the context of cyber war, neoliberalism will be applied to explain the state behavior while engaging in the cyber war. Another theory might be liberalism, which is traditionally promote cooperation and give equals to the non-state focus to the non-state actors and how they might impact things. Clearly, one might be able to use the theory of liberalism to assess potential solution to the cyber war issues. If one supports the ideas that the states are a social construct, then the constructivism might be used to explain the reason for cyber war, the different stages of development, as well as the involvement of particular actors. Moving on to why we decided to use the theory of neorealism for our framework, we quote Kenneth Waltz, who once stated, "The international system is in a state of anarchy, coupled with what many sees as the failing US hegemony. This lack of clear hierarchy means that there is no guarantee that a state might not attack another state. Offensive neorealism suggests that the presence of fear and uncertainty pushes a state to prioritize economic influence, military strength, and other powers." When we apply the offense-defense balance concept in examining how cyber war occur, we can see that there seems to be more merits in investing in offensive cyber capabilities as opposed to the defensive ones. This is because cyber attacks can be easily carried by software and competent cyber invaders. For cyber defense, more elements are involved like firewalls, antivirus software, as well as the good maintenance from cyber personnel. The weakness of using the theory of liberalism is that cooperation seems to be a bit hard since there is no currently actors that have sufficient strength to control the regulate behavior in cyberspace. Constructivism is too an alternate analysis that does touch on the national security, but more to the perception about identities and interests. However, in contrast, neorealism is more suitable to understanding the cyber war, especially with the offense-defense balance concept. Neorealism allowed for a more realistic account of the individuals involved as well as the flows of the things.
Real world problem. There is 145 significant cyber attack and 18 attack from Russia. From December 2019 until December 2020 shows that US has either suffered or been targeted a cyber attack, which is 21 times, and has adopted offensive cyber attack practices only twice. Cyber attacks concerning both countries and recent trend, cyber attacks have been primarily focused on information regarding vaccine development as well as campaign related to US presidential election.
We have narrowed down our scope of analysis to four key cyber clashes between the United States of America and Russia. These incidents are listed in chronological order, as can be seen on the timeline to my right. For example, for the first one, we can see the Russian interference in the US presidential election of 2016. What actually happened was that in January 2017, the CIA, or the Central Intelligence Agency, the FBI, the Federal Bureau of Investigation, as well as the National Security Agency, NSA, actually issued a joint report that confirmed the presence of Russian interference in the 2016 US election. So what the report alleged was that Russia aimed to undermine Americans' confidence in the electoral system, as well as deprecate Hillary Clinton. So what they managed to find was that over 80,000 publications by a Russian company called the Internet Research Agency was found on Facebook. And this was linked to over 470 different accounts. On Twitter, there were a whopping 50,258 accounts that were also found to have links to Russian bots, which have been programmed to share false information. So statistics show that actually 3.8 million tweets can be accounted for from these fake accounts. This means that almost 19% of the total tweets were actually from these accounts or these bots, and that was related to the US presidential election in 2016. Another thing is that the bots' behavior showed 80% support for Donald Trump, and this meant that they repeatedly used selected hashtags like hashtag Trump 2016 and hashtag Never Hillary. Looking into why Russia might have taken this stance against Hillary, some observers traces back to the breaking out of riots in December 2011. So this was at Putin's own announcement of candidacy for the Russian presidency. However, the issue of this is that US-Russia relations have always been stiff post-Cold War. This worsened during Obama's administration after the US imposed economic sanctions on Russia. And this was followed with Germany, French, the Netherlands, Ah. Essentially, observers feel that Russia's stance against Hillary has its origins from riots in December 2011 during Putin's own announcement of candidacy for the Russian presidency. But the essence of the issue, that is, the US Russia relations, have always been stiff post Cold War. This has also been seen with worsening during Obama's administration because of the economic sanctions that they imposed on Russia. So, why did Russia choose to use cyber warfare in the 2016 US presidential election? Many believe that it was in order to cut the potential of Democratic Party candidate Hillary Clinton. This is because Russia has the belief that if the next president of the US is from the Democratic Party, Obama's policies might have continued, which would obviously worsen Russia's economy. However, the next president of the US, Donald Trump, in fact, halted the economic sanction, but this reprieve didn't last long because Congress voted to put Russia under economic sanction again. So Russia also showed signs of favoring Trump's re-election over Joe Biden. The reason again being political, because Biden had been a part of Obama's administration previously. So in August 2020, Facebook actually shared that they had dismantled two Russian botnets that had been propagating false information. This was also supported by Microsoft Part, who actually notified the Biden campaign of Russian hackers attempting to hack into their election. What they were trying to do was to gain access to a server, SKD Knickerbocker, which is an American communication agency that was primarily used by Democratic candidates. So we must note that this tactic actually succeeded in 2016 and resulted in the Hillary Clinton email leak scandal. However, looking at this incident, we cannot say that Russia is a staunch supporter of a Trump-led United States, merely that it would better tolerate Trump as the next president as opposed to any Democrat representative. This can obviously be seen from the way that the infamous Internet Research Agency spread false information about both Joe Biden and Donald Trump. The puzzling thing is how Trump often is viewed as being obsessed with Putin and viewing Putin as his kindly elder brother. He often downplays Russian involvement in such attacks and is always quick to turn the finger on China for inciting stability. However, in this issue, analysis from this issue shows us that we cannot conclude Russia is a staunch supporter of a Trump-led US, merely that Russia prefers Trump's leadership over any potential Democrat representative. So this is easily proven by the way the Internet Research Agency, that's the infamous company we talked about earlier, continued to spread false information about both Joe Biden and Donald Trump. The odd thing is Trump's reaction to most of this. He often views Putin as his kindly elder brother and downplays Russian involvement in these attacks. He's always quick to point the finger at China for inciting instability. And this can be seen when we later look at the fourth incident, which is the SolarWinds hack. Now, moving on to the second event. As we can see on the timeline, there is a second event which is stated CIA. So this actually refers to the 2018 CIA offensive cyber operations. So what happened was the report or the expose of previously confidential information came out in July 2020. This was about President Trump's secret order to the CIA, the Central Intelligence Agency, giving them the power to undertake offensive cyber operations against the Islamic Revolutionary Guard Corps, which are based in Iran, the intelligence agency FSB, which is based in Russia. So the reports actually claim that a dozen operations had been previously on the CIA's wish list and they were soon carried out as soon as the order was signed. So this is in contrast to previous administrations, which have been known to limit the allowance or the power that is given to this agency. And this only further solidifies the unexpectedness of President Trump's actions. So these operations that were carried out were in the style of something called hack and dump. So it's similar to what Russian hackers and WikiLeaks previously used. This style refers to how hacked data or stolen data is then dumped online in a deliberate attempt to leak this confidential information, thus, a hack and a dump. Incidents that have been tied to these operations actually include the leak of the source code of Iran's cyber espionage tools, as well as revealing two contractors that have worked with Russia's FSB. So there was a lot of criticism surrounding these attacks because many felt that there was a subsequent extent of power. A lot of criticism, a lot of criticism surrounded these attacks because of the usage of those tactics as well as the scope of the power that CIA had been given. So moving on to the third event or the third issue, we're looking at the targeting of COVID-19 vaccine research by Russian hackers. So in 2020, the biggest change that came to the world was, of course, the introduction or the arrival of the coronavirus. And in the attempt of countries in trying to get their people safe, many countries also began the race to create a vaccine. And this resulted in vaccine research becoming extremely valuable as the companies vied with each other to be the first that could come up with an efficient or effective vaccine. So health sector has never been the health sector has never been immune to hackers, and some believe that it is unethical for certain sectors, like the health sector, to be disrupted by hacking attacks because direct impacts in this particular sector are much more organic than perhaps a data breach in a plumbing department. So in July, reports of Russian state-backed hackers targeting research from the Oxford vaccine was released. It was mentioned in this report that they employed a technique known as password spraying, which involves trying out generic passwords on a large number of accounts. Coupled with the fact that academic institutions are generally less well resourced and defended as their partners in vaccine research, it was mentioned in the report that these hackers had employed a technique known as password spraying. Now, with the context of both academic institutions and drug companies working together to create the vaccine, there was a slight gap and a difference in the way that they handled their resources, aka all their research, and how defended or well defended this data was from the outside. So, a lot of information like production methods and trial successes were targeted. The reason why this is sensitive information is because if it is manipulated, then it can affect a country's choice on whether or not they want to purchase this vaccine. It can also affect the integrity of the vaccine. And now let's move on to the last event that we've highlighted. So this is known as the SolarWinds hack. It has also been called the hack of the decade. It is a massive cyber attack that has actually had victims from the US Departments of State, Homeland Security, the National Institutes of Health, and even the Department of Energy's National Nuclear Security Administration. And this basically means that this department handled the US's nuclear weapons arsenal, and it was breached. So this issue is unfolding real time, and majority sources have pointed that the hackers are Russian, or at least come from Russian origin. So what is the true story behind this SolarWinds hack? SolarWinds is actually an IT infrastructure and network management firm. So reports state that it actually might have been breached from as early as October 2019. That's a whole 1 year from when it was discovered. The mode of attack was actually something a bit odd. They planted a malicious code in software updates to Orion, which was one of the tools or products under SolarWinds. So in this software update of Orion, or the patch, there was a malicious code. This patch was then circulated to all SolarWinds customers, and all their clients who installed it effectively ended up building or planting a Russian backdoor in their own network. Now, it wasn't just state departments that were victims of this. Even tech firms like Microsoft and FireEye both were victims in this issue. But FireEye was the first to find out about it and the first to make a proactive stance against it. So together, they have been working to close this back door. But the effects of this breach are irreversible and are essentially very long lasting because it will change the way that the US has to deal with cybersecurity, and it has also changed the way that we see cyber warfare. For example, victims cannot confirm as to whether or not they have been hacked or not. Even if you manage to close the back door, you still do not know how much the hacker may have potentially accessed beforehand. A key thing to note is that experts mention even if you don't see any information being leaked, it doesn't mean that the hacker hasn't been there. It could just have been that the hacker wasn't interested in the information and left. But the breach or whatever, they could have also planted another minor backdoor, and that means that every company in this situation should view it as though they have already been hacked and proceed from there. So it's a key development in cyber warfare because specific targets weren't the subject of this attack. For example, the hackers didn't specifically target the nuclear department. They also didn't specifically target Microsoft. Instead, they targeted what is known as the supply chain. So that was Orion. Orion, which supplied its network and IT infrastructure to these other clients, and from there, they managed to infiltrate into these other companies. So this means that, of course, it comes to mind, US is a first world country. First world country? The first question that obviously comes to mind is, was the US unaware of such possibilities? Were they truly defenseless? Did they have no firewall or no sort of cyber defense? In fact, the US had spent billions on one question comes to mind. Was the US totally unprepared for this? Had they made no preparations in terms of cyber defense? In truth, the US had a very sophisticated system called Einstein. It was designed to detect digital intrusions and was heavily invested into by the US. But in this event, it was close to useless only because of the difference in the target of the hackers, because the hackers targeted the supply chain. Aside from that, as mentioned earlier, it wasn't even a state organization that discovered the breach, but instead it was a private or a non-state actor, the private security, cybersecurity. Another thing to note that this breach wasn't even discovered by the US government. It was instead discovered by a non-state actor, the private cybersecurity firm FireEye. They were the first to notice this breach and respond, while the US Cyber Command, which is the department in charge of these things, was completely blindsided, as stated by the New York Times. So what we know from this is a shift in cybersecurity industry. We can see that the future trend would most likely be companies will presuppose breaches are existent instead of the traditional method of responding to a breach after it has been discovered. This means that companies will be working 24/7 with the assumption that they might already have been breached and therefore keep emphasizing and strengthening their cyber defense. This is a a different way as compared to traditionally when companies would only react if a breach had been discovered. So this summarizes the four key incidents that we have highlighted between US and Russia in the context of cyberspace warfare. And now we'll be moving on to the recommendations and the conclusion of our topic today. So for the first recommendation, I'll pass it to Jay.
The first recommendation for US Russian cyberspace problem solution is advancing the US cybersecurity. The US has been a target of cyberbullying for so many years and with too little response. Together with improved cooperation with international partners, US policymakers should make their cybersecurity more stable. The CSIS Strategic Technologies Program has developed an electoral security scorecard evaluating the existing threat and risk to the upcoming elections and identify specific measures to protect the 2020 presidential election. Thus, we would like to suggest machine learning in cybersecurity to detect cyber threats or attack purposes. Machine learning uses algorithms to allow a database to use patterns of network security activity and to provide interpretation or prediction on collected data such as records, actual communication, and payments. Machine learning algorithms are used in a broad array of applications such as email classification or filters and image analysis, where it is difficult or impossible to create traditional algorithms to carry out the necessary task. The Amazon Guard Duty program is also one of the example of machine learning which applies data analytics in a company ongoing network security and monitoring service for public scanning, and also Amazon Web Services AWS generated database stream for identifying unusual or suspicious behavior in the AWS environment. Hence, the US will be able to broaden the core tenets of a free, stable, and secure internet in the international arena by enforcing this machine learning method from the Amazon Guard Duty program. But of course, with upgrade the machine learning to the national level and widen the network security. This will also enable the US continue to lead a more secure and stable cyber future and prevent from the Russian cyber threat or attack in the future.
Second recommendation is Armistice Treaty. Armistice Treaty is an agreement for termination of active conflict between two or more countries. The agreement might be the partial or temporary termination of conflict. Armistice treaty may involve a general armistice for a total termination for all hostilities. However, the agreement might not recognized legally. Armistice treaty should have a mediator in dealing with the agreement, because if there is no mediator, the purpose of the Armistice treaty might not achieve. And lastly, mediator can be international organizations such as United Nations or neutral state that did not connected to the conflict.
I'll be presenting the third recommendation, which is the Defend Forward strategy. So the Defend Forward strategy is a relatively new strategy. Introduced by the Defense Department Cyber Strategy in 2018, it has the objective of disrupting or halting malicious cyber activity at the source. So this marks the beginning of a new perspective of how cyber defense might be implemented in cyber warfare, because it actually involves going beyond the networks an actor might originally own. So as you can see on the slide, there are two categories of activities under this strategy. Category 1 mainly involves gathering of information, which is then shared with an actor's allies, partner agencies, and critical infrastructure, by maneuvering in networks where adversaries might be present. In other words, defense mechanisms are continuously strengthened, while engaging with the adversary is secondary. The second type, or the second category, involves a more offensive and proactive take on things. So this means that these type of activities might include launching cyber attacks on the hacking groups. So the main objective here is to counter the opponent's cyber capabilities and weaken their internal infrastructure before they can mount or pose a threat to ourselves. So this marks the three different solutions that we have suggested for the issues previously highlighted. We will be listing the most suitable solution along with our reasoning in the conclusion that follows next. Our research has shown us that neorealism is the most suitable international relations theory to analyze issues of cyber warfare. High-profile cyber incidents between US and Russia have proven to us that the offense-defense balance is an extremely important concept. Just remembering the lack of foresight on the US, which potentially helped the Russian hackers perpetrate and succeed with the SolarWinds hack, is enough to show the rest of the world that cyber warfare isn't just about how strong your attacks can be. However, upon further analysis, we must note that the US might have previously been employing a different tactic, which is known as deterrence, to prevent cyber espionage and cyber warfare. So this refers to issuance of warrants for identified state-backed hackers, as well as threat of sanctions over cyber intelligence. A key thing to remember about the SolarWinds hack is that even though state departments had been breached, many claim that this breach was only confined to the business portals of these departments, and that, for example, in the nuclear department, none of the hackers gain access to any crucial weaponry-related data. We want to highlight the fact that there was repeated involvement of non-state actors throughout our analysis and research, like Microsoft, Facebook, and FireEye, and they seem to be performing much better at identifying and resolving problems caused by cyber attacks. This is in comparison to state organizations or departments like the US Cyber Command. This as a pivotal moment in the development and understanding of cybersecurity. We believe that now cyber warfare in the international scene will very much emphasize the importance of a defend forward strategy, as well as acknowledge how severe a defend forward failure can be. In other words, nations will have to recognize how serious it is if they fail to stop, disrupt, or halt any malicious cyber activity at its source. For the stability of the international society, we highly support the first type of defend forward activities. This omits committing offensive cyber operations. We believe this strategy is more peace-oriented and consistent with efforts to balance offensive and defensive capabilities of an actor, referring, of course, to the theory of neorealism. And now let me end with a quote by Peter Drucker. He said that culture eats strategy for breakfast. We see that from our research, inherent culture in organizations or countries is extremely vital to cybersecurity because no matter how holistic a strategy might be, if the culture in that organization or the culture in that nation does not help or aid the implementation of the strategy, then it may very well be eaten for breakfast. Thank you very much for paying attention. And this has been Group 2's presentation on cyberspace warfare, US-Russia relations. Thank you.